progressive movement, first and foremost, is a reform movement coming off of the heels of the Civil War.
What we would call the free labor Republican movement. They were
progressivism
Republicans
mostly
who
in urban
really
areas.
were fighting for a
And the reason
society
for
where
that
there
makes
was
a
free
lot of
labor.
sense,
Workers
because
were
at the
free
time
to
progressivism
sell their
was
labor.
the 1880s and certainly by
ordinary
1900.
Americans about
The United States was going through
LaFollette, he was an
profound
interesting
change.
person.
LaFollette was an heir to the progressives. Farmers were also
Response to
experiencing very
industrialization,
difficult times
urbanization,
because
immigration, progressivism's attempt to get control over the pace of change.
In the early 1900s, there was a rise of progressivism. This was a time when people were tired of the abuses that big business and monopolies inflicted on workers, consumers, and farmers. People were tired of the government being controlled by special interests. Sound familiar? In this era, the people and their leaders united to enact a series of reforms which created better government and laws which helped protect workers, consumers, and farmers. The progressive era got its start in Wisconsin because of Robert LaFollette, also known as Fighting Bob LaFollette. LaFollette was a reformer who was not controlled by special interests, and in his first 3 years as U.S. Senator, passed laws aimed at the unfair practices of railroads. It was under LaFollette's leadership Wisconsin acquired national fame and enacted the first workmen's compensation laws, unemployment insurance, and income tax. Hi, I'm Jim Carpenter. In this half hour, we will explore the progressive era and the leading role Wisconsin played during this movement, as well as explore how the ideals and goals of the progressive era are still being fought for today. But before we discuss the present struggle, let's take a look at the past.
At the time progressivism really got rolling, the 1890s, and certainly by 1900, the United States was going through profound changes. Number one, industrialization. Number two, urbanization. Number three, immigration.
the United States experienced its first great wave of mergers and acquisitions when large national corporations and trusts, such as the Railroad Trust, Swift and Armor and Meat, these large national corporations, essentially monopolies, were forming.
Some of Marxism comes into it in a sense of his whole thing was that those folks who controlled everything were not sharing in those surplus profits that they were making with the workers who made them those profits.
Workers who had formerly been people with a lot of status in their communities were being de-skilled and losing that status.
Certain entities within the larger family of Americans have this disproportionate power, and thus corporations are so powerful, banks are so powerful, the railroads are so powerful, that democracy itself is at risk.
And the progressive movement emerged as a response to this. Wisconsin was a leader in this movement. And of course, the leader of Wisconsin populism was none other than the man known as Fighting Bob LaFollette.
Came in with some real, for some, radical types of ideas. He thought that the Republican Party was sort of losing its soul. You know, the party of anti-slavery and everything was sort of, you know, backtracking on some stuff, and that the railroad, that was his big nemesis.
LaFollette wanted regulation on the terms of what? Consumers and citizens. Whereas the national leader, President Teddy Roosevelt, he was sometimes very sympathetic to regulating big banks and corporations and railroads on their own terms. In other words, having the corporations propose the regulation and then the federal government enforcing it. See, that's a conflict. See, LaFollette ever went down that road. He was always for regulation on the terms of the American consumer, the American citizen.
LaFollette was an advocate for the interests, both economic and political, of working people, and he was a fighter against corporate power, and he was an opponent of imperialist war. And he led Wisconsin, and Wisconsin led the nation in establishing minimum wage laws, worker compensation, the Wisconsin idea, and one of the remnants of that period is the Legislative Reference Bureau, which continues to do research, quality research, on any issue that comes before the Wisconsin legislature today.
Many men during this period felt that politics was not for women.
They were excluded from many areas of work, both by custom and by employment practices.
There were no laws on the books against children laborers, and oftentimes children suffered a great deal. And as a result of that, women of all races helped to push for labor laws designed to protect children in these industries. Another good example will be safety. Nowadays we have OSHA that monitors industry. Back during that particular time frame, you didn't have that. As a result, a lot of people were injured, killed on the job, or maimed on the job.
The suffragette movement had worked very closely with the abolitionist movement prior to the Civil War because they were both fighting for equal rights. That was one of the battles progressives helped lead, and of course that ultimately ended in 1919 when women got the right to vote.
Some of the things the progressives did would not strike us as liberal today. And race relations, minorities, is a classic example of that. If you look at the black-white color line.
It was a period in which African Americans were coming from slavery. And as a result of that, there were a tremendous amount of problems. Roughly 1877 to about 1919 is called the lynching era, in which African Americans were lynched a great deal, on average about 81 lynches per year.
And so the progressives study that, and they say, well, how do you prevent lynching? And the progressive solution is segregation. You keep the black man away from the white woman. How? By segregating the races. And so the progressives did what? They institutionalized segregation within the federal bureaucracy during their era. It's hard to generalize about them. A lot of progressives supported segregation, but they didn't all support segregation because another progressive group is the NAACP.
Greatest gain in that Reconstruction period was in the field of education. It's during that particular time frame that you see a lot of historical black colleges and universities being founded. And as a result of that, African Americans made a tremendous amount of progress.
There were conflicting forces within the Republican Party.
Even the same movement, progressivism, can often go in two different directions at once.
There was the following wing of the Republican Party, and then there was the corporate wing of the Republican Party. And eventually the corporate wing of the Republican Party dominated.
World War I is crucial because what World War I will do is put a real deep cleavage in progressivism and kill the movement. And see, and people like Follett weren't gung-ho on the war, whereas people like Teddy Roosevelt, he's gung-ho on World War I, a true war hawk. And so that really kills the movement. But also, the progressive era died during World War I because of Woodrow Wilson's priorities. And so progressivism is a casualty of World War I.
One of the things we see throughout American history is when third parties have developed, they have never lasted. And one of the major reasons is that the issues that they have identified generally are picked up by one of the two dominant parties, the Republicans or the Democrats. So the viability of a third party or the need for a progressive movement waned.
Today, the progressive agenda, which parallels the issues that Bob La Follette was concerned with, are still unresolved problems in our country. Joining me in the studio to discuss the current state of progressivism and those issues is the Honorable Vel Phillips and Ed Garvey. Vel Phillips has made history as the first African-American woman to graduate from the University of Wisconsin Law School and be elected into Milwaukee City Council. She also became the first African-American woman judge in the state and remains the only African-American ever elected to a statewide office in Wisconsin. She has served on the Democratic National Committee, and through her distinguished political career, she became friends with Dr. King and Presidents Kennedy, Johnson, and Carter. Welcome, Vel.
Thank you.
Ed Garvey is the organizer of Fighting Bob Fest and editor of FightingBob.com. This is our country's largest annual gathering of progressive thinkers, elected officials, and activists. Ed was also the Democratic Party candidate for senator in 1986 and the Democratic Party candidate for governor in 1998. Welcome, Ed.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Ed, I'm going to ask you the first question. In the progressive era, people were angry at the power of big business to influence laws for their benefit and contrary to the best interests of the public. Do you see the same problem in the role played by insurance companies and drug makers in today's healthcare debate?
Oh, it's absolutely out of control. I mean, LaFollette, if you read his autobiography, he said that the lumber barons and the railroad owners controlled both of the parties, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. They'd go into one room and nominate the Republican candidate for governor, go into the other room and nominate the Democratic candidate for governor, and then say, let the people decide. So they controlled everything, and we're back to that point right now. This Supreme Court decision 2 weeks ago just knocks the foundations out from under democracy. If we allow this to continue, corporations will just dominate every aspect of our society. It's got to be changed.
Val,
on that, we really don't need any elections because let the corporate people just decide who they want.
well, you know, unions get to say something, spend some money on this too. But how does union expenditures compare to corporate expenditures?
A pittance. When people compare the unions with corporate, it's a pittance. It's a joke. It's they can't. They don't control anything.
Well, part of it is the laws have been distorted against the rights of working people to organize. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to form a union to get to the point where you could play that role. So to say that unions are going to have an equal voice is ridiculous, as Val said.
Yeah, pittance.
Now, there was some talk about unions getting some more power under the new administration with the law which allows workers to sign a card and join a union by signing a card. Can you say something about that?
I've actually done that when we organized some unions in Canada, and it's wonderful. As soon as you get a majority of employees to sign a card saying they want the union to represent them, the employer must sit down and negotiate immediately. And if they can't agree at the end of the first year of the contract, an arbitrator imposes the contract on the parties. But it's all been shoved aside now because the Obama administration has been unable to get people to coalesce around the labor law reform package that he's been talking about. So there's been almost no discussion of it ever since the health care bill fell apart.
I don't even know if it'll come to pass. So
now, it's the law that people can't be fired for trying to start a union. But in reality, Val, do people get fired for trying to start a union even though it's illegal?
I don't think, in reality, I don't think that happens, do you?
Oh, yeah.
It does happen?
Yeah, it's still going on. And part of the reason is we no longer have a National Labor Relations Board.
Oh, that is right. That's right.
Because two of them, there are two members left. When I organized the NFL Players Union, we found that as soon as someone would speak up, management would trade that player or cut that player or whatever, and the same thing goes on in other unions. We tried to organize the nurses up in Fond du Lac. It was almost a joke because they were all being threatened by management if they joined the union that they would lose their jobs. So we're in a world of hurt when it comes to organizing right now.
You know, just a little bit back to the healthcare debate. I understand that we've given up the right to bargain with drug companies to get lower drug prices. My understanding is they have that right in Canada. Do you think it's corporate power that's stopped us from having that right?
Oh, without a doubt. Mm-hmm. And you know, it comes on MSNBC. This gentleman was talking about he couldn't understand where Lieberman was coming from. But he never said that Lieberman's wife is on the boards of many of the very big insurance companies. Yeah. And he said he didn't get the connection. I said, the disconnect. I said, what you don't get is the connection with Lieberman's wife serving on the boards of these huge insurance companies.
Wouldn't you love to kick him out of the Democratic Party?
Oh, God.
Just say, Joe, thanks very much, but we'd like to have a retirement party for you. Yeah, thank you, goodbye.
Val, I'd like to address this question to you. The progressive era was not very progressive when it came to racial equality. In fact, it was a time of many lynchings. However, Robert La Follette did speak out against racial injustice. We now have an African-American president. Where are we in the struggle to end discrimination?
Well, I say to many, especially black audience, African American audiences, not to get feeling too good because we have a black president. We still, discrimination and racial inequities are still alive and well in America. I'm sorry to say that.
And this hatred that seems to be pouring out from these Tea Party people and so on.
Just even the way they treat the President of the United States is, he wasn't born in Hawaii, or he was born in Hawaii and it wasn't a state, and just no regard. And I think even the Wall Street Journal ran an ad that was very derogatory. It wasn't the Wall Street Journal's ad, but they ran it in the paper and people saw it. So even the way, and of course, to me, they forget that Obama came in with 2 wars, a terrible economy, and all this, and they expected in 6 months, really.
Right.
Yeah, they were saying, what has he done?
Now, I've got a few heroes in Wisconsin in terms of the progressive movement, and I'm honored to be with one of them right now, with Val Phillips. Think about this. She is the only African American to win a statewide race for office.
Right.
Here we are. This is unbelievable.
That is unbelievable.
At this day and age, it is.
And look at the way that Louis Butler was treated by the right wing and Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce. I mean, here they were suggesting sort of like a Willie Horton ad that Louis Butler was trying to help a sex crime person to get out on the streets. None of it was true. And still they haven't done it. That cost him the election. And the one who is arguing that case is sitting on the court.
I really hope that the time will come when they won't even mention who was the first this or first that. It'll be so...
Yeah, it'll be a moot point.
Yeah, a moot point.
But let's talk about this in regards to getting a job. Now, a lot of the jobs are in the suburbs. We know African Americans primarily live in the central city, and it's a de facto segregation. Now, you were a hero in opening up our city and the open housing marches.
Yes, right.
Do you think that we still have a lot to do to make the suburbs open to integration?
Of course.
And will this help with the getting jobs in the suburbs?
Well, you know, it's a matter of money, too. We still are pretty low on the economic scale, and you can't buy a house in the suburb for, without the money to do it. So there's still a lot of inequities in many ways. And I'd like to think that we've gotten past the last hired and first fired, but that we haven't really.
You also just look at the number of people who are stopped, searched, arrested, convicted, sent to prison, sent to jail. It's overwhelmingly African American. I represented all the inmates at Supermax prison. I think 53% of the inmates were African American, about 10% Hispanic. They didn't have a single black person on the staff or of the prison, and they said that the Hispanics couldn't use the phone because they didn't have any people who spoke Spanish who could monitor the phone calls. But it is clearly a discrimination against African Americans.
In the prison,
driving while black.
Yeah, definitely.
And actually, there's been a study done that shows that when people hire, they actually look at names, and if they sound African American, those people are put down further down on the list. I don't know if you've heard that study. It was
when was that?
It was a recent study. Mark Levine has quoted that study, and he says people are discriminated against because their names sound African American.
So Marcus Garvey is the reason that I didn't win.
That's true. That's famous African American. Question 3, Ed, I'll address this to you. The progressives believed in a social safety net to protect workers from the problems of capitalism, such as unemployment. This is why they developed unemployment compensation. However, today there are millions of unemployed who are not eligible for unemployment insurance. For example, young workers entering the workforce for the first time. Should the safety net be extended to provide some income to those who want to work and cannot find a job and who have no unemployment insurance? For example, should there be a work relief program like the WPA of the New Deal?
Absolutely. And let's start with health care for everybody.
Right.
The Canadian system, or the way that it is in Western Europe or almost every other country in the world, if you started with health care for everyone, then you'd give people a start toward a decent job. that we have to improve our schools and put more money into the schools and start helping kids when they're at the kindergarten level and working their way up. Instead of blaming teachers for bad performance because we don't have enough money in the school system, we have to change, I think, our whole attitude toward the importance of education. Mm-hmm. So my father taught me during the Depression, when the WPA was there, he said, never make fun of that or listen to anybody who does, because all of these people wanted to contribute something to society. They wanted to have a few dollars in their pocket. They wanted to pay their taxes. They wanted to contribute. Everybody I know wants to work and wants to be part of our society, and they want to help promote the Commonwealth. We're not doing enough to give them that chance. So yes, we need to have that kind of a program reinstituted immediately.
And a lot of people don't understand that some of our most important structures and parks were made during that era.
Right.
So, I mean, some people call it not government spending, but government investment. Mm-hmm. You're actually investing in permanent infrastructure that helps all of us.
And if you want to privatize everything, you know, I think they've even had some privatization on the zoo. Yeah. I mean, there's hardly any, you know, there should be things that people who don't have a lot of money can go and enjoy.
Sure.
Without having to pay money. But you know, I think getting back to another point that you made, if fighting Bob LaFollette is probably turning over in his grave right now because of this recent decision of the Supreme Court that will allow all of the corporations to give, even foreign corporations, to give money, and that is going. That if something is not done about that, how can we go to other countries and tell them how to become a democratic nation, and we won't be any. We're not even completely democratic.
It's the end of democracy.
It's the end. Yeah.
Simply, they could put in $1 billion against Russ Feingold in this race, or $500 million against somebody else,
yeah, and
not even miss the money. So that if they allow this to stand, and I think they've gone too far, and perhaps we can awaken people to the fact that we need to have a democracy where we own the elections as a public, we pay for those elections, and we say to these corporations, you're allowed to organize for economic purposes, not for political purposes.
Right.
And you don't have aging parents, you don't have siblings who have problems, you don't get a right to vote.
And the big insurance companies are putting so much money in that the ordinary person doesn't even know that the health bill would be the best thing for them.
Right. People are lied to, and a lot of disinformation. Now, let's go to another issue here. The reforms that began with Wisconsin workmen's compensation and unemployment compensation eventually spread throughout the country. This was necessary to prevent states without these laws from gaining competitive advantage to attract business. We now live in a global economy. If Fighting Bob were alive today, would he be fighting for trade agreements that had laws to protect workers and the environment?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's
without a doubt.
NAFTA. I mean, for heaven's sakes, we all predicted what was going to happen. Ross Perot predicted what was going to happen. If you passed NAFTA, and Bill Clinton went forward and fought hard to get it passed, we would lose millions of manufacturing jobs, and that's what's happened. We have 17 million people unemployed right now, which is just incredible. And I don't see any program that can bring them back except the reindustrialization of this country. You can only do that by having some fair trade and agreements that other countries, if they're going to trade with us, have to obey the environmental laws as well.
Now, there was a great article in the Journal Sentinel a couple of years ago about how African Americans migrated to Milwaukee to get these good factory jobs, and people got a good income, and then those jobs left, and that's part of the problems that Milwaukee now faces, that people who came here for manufacturing jobs can't find those good jobs anymore.
That's
so,
right.
I mean, you lived through those times, and you saw Milwaukee have all these manufacturing jobs, and you saw them
disappear.
Have you seen the growth and the contraction?
Yes. Oh, of course. It's very obvious. And you know that the money is at the bottom of a lot of it. You know, you can fight for fair housing, but if you don't have the money to buy a house, well, it just.
Well, and look at the disgrace of the evictions that are going on in the state of Wisconsin right now, and the foreclosures. There ought to be a moratorium on foreclosures and evictions until we get people back on their feet. You can't kick people out of their homes and then complain that nobody's keeping track of the property and making it a decent place to live.
They ought to tax the people, the banks that are giving these big money bonuses. That money should be heavily.
But they worked hard for those bonuses.
And they gambled with other people's money, and when they won, they kept the profits, and when they lost, they came to the taxpayer, right?
Yeah.
Can you imagine somebody arguing that he deserves more than $500 million a year? I mean,
I don't know how
it's just beyond
that. And yet we go into other countries and try to tell them how to do their business, and it's just deplorable. It's not a good time. It's not a good time.
We have got to do something about money in politics, and the only way that we can do it is to have publicly financed campaigns. I mean, the legislature finally said, okay, they're going to have publicly financed Supreme Court races. But already David Prosser, who's up for election a year from now, is hinting that he's not going to go along with public financing and would raise additional monies. I think we ought to defeat him if he's going to do that, because otherwise we're done even when it comes to the court.
Well, thank you, Val and Ed, for your insight on the current status of the progressive movement. It's certain that the move for progressive direction is still strong in our country and state. Thank all of you for watching, and good night.
Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose.
I know.